All right, testing. Wonderful. So, my name is Robert Baines, President and CEO of the NATO Association. We are going to be talking about security guarantees and what they mean for Ukraine, the essential nature of them. In so much of the past 4 or 5 months since the presidency of Donald Trump started, there has been so much, how shall we say, just challenge in this area. We want to delve into what that means. What is the security guarantee requirement for Ukraine? What will it mean to Ukraine itself? And then what are some of the creative options beyond NATO membership? As Diane mentioned, NATO membership has been dangled for Ukraine for more than a decade, almost more than 2 decades in a couple of years. And it's essential that we come up with some form of security guarantee for the prosperous growth that is so essential for Ukraine's future, and which could do so much for Canada and the rest of Europe at the same time. So we want to delve into that a little bit. We've got an amazing panel for us today. We do have 2 members of that panel on Zoom, unfortunately. I always like to have people in the room, but sometimes time and space don't always line up with our wishes. But either way, we're going to have a great discussion and a battle of minds on this issue. So just to briefly introduce those to my left, terrific honor to have them on this stage. They're great supporters of the NATO Association and the discussions like the one we're having today. But Alex Lenoshka is Associate Professor of International Relations at the University of Waterloo and is the Director of the Master of Public Service program at Waterloo. Thanks so much for joining us and for coming up from the Loo. And I should have mentioned you are a doctor, always important to mention that. Dr. Balkan Devlen is the co-founder and principal at the Pendulum Geopolitical Advisory. He's also senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I'm sure many of you have seen both of our esteemed gentlemen on many panels on issues surrounding Ukraine and the importance of security to Canada. I should also mention that Balkan is an adjunct research professor at Carleton University. So I believe we should also have Ambassador Kovaliv on Zoom now. I'm not sure if that is the case. I know that General Hodges is. So General, I'll introduce you very briefly. All of you should have the bios in your pamphlet, so I won't go into deep bios, but Lieutenant General retired Ben Hodges, joining us virtually, is the former commander of U.S. Army Europe, and obviously has quite a lot of an ability to explain some of the issues at hand when it comes to security guarantees and especially NATO membership. Finally, last but not least, Her Excellency Yuliya Kovaliv, the Ambassador of Ukraine to Canada. She's been a terrific champion for our discussions for so long, and it's a wonder to be able to invite her back to this discussion. So, just wanted to confirm if we've got the Ambassador to start us off. We do. All right. Excellency, I gather we do have you. We're thrilled to hear from you today, and the Ambassador is going to talk a little bit about what NATO membership and generally security guarantees would mean for Ukraine.
Good morning, everybody, distinguished panelists, the guests, and dear friends. It is wonderful that so many people gathered on a Sunday morning today to talk about my country and to talk about the country who is actually today on the forefront for not only protecting our own country, our own sovereignty, our own people, but also on the forefront, which you mentioned in the opening remarks, in what is called the rules-based order. And it's not only the words, the rule-based order. It was actually a system that allowed both the big countries and small countries, developing countries and big economies, military powers, and those countries who don't have strong military, to coexist together peacefully and to focus for bringing the well-being to their people. And that's what we saw as a result of the Second World War. Was Russia's invasion, which started in 2014, and the full-scale invasion that started in 2022, we all understand that this international rule-based order is cracking. And as I was 2 days ago talking with one of the champions for the support of Ukraine, is the former Lithuanian foreign minister, and you know how dedicated the Baltic countries are and how vocal they are among NATO, among all the EU countries for the support of Ukraine, and how they demonstrate not only the dedication with the words, with the statement, but the real commitment with the percentage of their GDP, which is dedicated to the support of Ukraine. He mentioned the concept of kind of like tectonical changes, meaning that is when the system is cracking in one place, you will never know where the next crack is, but definitely it will. So I think it's important for us to once again remind that that what with Russian invasion of Ukraine and their attempts to withdraw the borders of the sovereign country, to erase the country, to build on their long-standing imperial ambitions, it's not only for Ukraine challenge, and it's not only for the European challenge, it's also the signal for the other dictators around the world. And that's why it's important that's why Ukraine is important, that's why this fight is important. And we saw the consequences of Russian full-scale invasion, not only among the NATO countries, not only among the European countries, but we saw the impact of this war for millions of people around the world, with the high food prices, with the record high energy prices back in 2022, with the Russian mercenaries appearing in an African continent, and many other things. So it's all linked together with regards to the geopolitics. But today we're also talking about Ukraine's NATO membership, which is actually the core for our long and lasting peace and security post-war. And this story, as Jan already mentioned in her speech, is a long way. And what's changed a lot since the last 10 years is definitely first the understanding among Ukrainian people and Ukrainian society, the desire to join NATO. We saw also as a result of the Russian full-scale invasion the total shift in Finland and Sweden, who joined NATO in a record speed, because they clearly understood that NATO is the institution that can provide this deterrence and security. And I still remember in my previous capacity as the Deputy Chief of Staff of President Zelensky, back in 2019, 2020, when Ukraine, and we were raising the question of Ukraine NATO membership, and we got this hesitation, and unfortunately those voices are still there. And this, we were sad at some of the, the discussion that probably you need to look on the example of Finland, kind of this Finlandization for Ukraine. And if we look now on the case of the Finland, and when Finland joined NATO, now I can definitely say that, even for those who were concerned and offering us this Finlandization part, yes, we would like to have this part. We would like to have the quick joining NATO. And I just want to explain for many of those who still believe in this, concept of, not to raise this question with, because of that would be some kind of the escalation with Russia. Look what happened when Sweden and Finland joined NATO. The borders between Russia and NATO extended over 1,500 kilometers. And what you got from Russia? Just the deep concerns. And we all understand that for decades, Russia has been also investing with many of their covert operations these messages with regards of kind of impossible Ukraine joining NATO. But that was also what Finland said, and that was also the experience of Finland. But look what happened there, and I think this is the great example for many of those who still believe in that will bring the escalation of Russia. Russia just swallowed the Finland being a member of the NATO, and the only thing that was the deep reserves. So I think for those who are still reluctant, they need to look on this case and just stopping to go through these Russian narratives, because it's not only about today's fighting war, but it's also for the future of the country and the future of the post-country rebuilding. This rebuilding, according to the recent estimations from the World Bank, will require over $500 billion. And we all understand that there is no government in the world, and even no collective effort of the allies who can provide this funding in the nearest future. So the only way for the successful rebuilding of Ukraine will be the massive attraction of the private capital to the country. And for this private capital to come to the country, there need to be few of the main pillars. One of them is the Ukrainian reforms. And today, as Ukraine is a candidate to EU membership, and we are not only fighting the war, but we are continue to implement those reforms that will bring us to the EU membership. This pillar is already on track. And you can go through the progress, what we've done for the last 2.5 years on our EU path, was preparing the review of the chapters and, coming very close to opening the first negotiation chapters with the EU. We have the ambitious, we have the resources, we have the will to make this process very speedy. Another thing is the security, because none of the private capital will be ready to invest in the country where there will be the risk of another invasion. And without this security, we will face the huge challenges on Ukraine's rebuilding. And Ukraine's rebuilding means Ukraine's security, Ukraine's prosperity, Ukraine's democracy, Ukraine's EU membership, and Ukraine's strong institutions. So it's all linked together. And the third thing, if we are talking about the NATO membership, we also need to talk about some pragmatism. Because what we have today is Ukraine's army, which is, to be frank, one of the strongest armies in the world. And if you look on what we have managed to achieve with the great will, great courage of Ukrainian people, and a lot of support from our partners, this is the strength of our army. And I frankly would say that none of the army of NATO has this experience that Ukrainian army has. And it is the experience of, first of all, the modern battlefield that is not the battlefield what we saw in all the previous wars and conflicts. This is the war where technology is playing a huge role. This is the war where a lot of mass systems are being used. This is the war where AI is stepping into the battlefield. And this is the Ukrainian army who has this experience. We also have the army that is using often kind of not a joke, but make it that our army is using the almost all possible military equipment that NATO countries have. The number of different types of tanks, ammunitions, artillery systems, air defense, and the new technology that the Ukrainian army uses on the battlefield. That's not that any other NATO member country were able to use. And NATO is looking at it, and many countries are asking Ukraine about the feedback, about the strategy, about how it's used. So we have this experience. The third thing is kind of the army that has a manpower. Today we have over 1 million people who are a member of our joint forces. And post-war, we will have the capacity of many of those who have the experience in the battlefield to join the NATO forces, whether it will be the peacekeeping operations in any other in different parts of the world, but also securing all the NATO requirements and the needs in terms of the manpower. Because we all understand that, and you see it in Canada and many other countries, the conscription is not going, and the recruitment to the army, it's not, going very well. And with the modern world where many politicians are, and many governments and many political parties have some trouble to explain to people why instead of putting the money for social support, for healthcare, for education, we need to put a lot of efforts and a lot of funding to support defense. So pragmatically, having Ukraine being a NATO member will bring a lot to the table to NATO, will strengthen NATO as the institution. And I think, trying to find a way and the arguments why it's not possible, it reminds me, our discussions with the NATO member countries of back in 2022, when we were asking for NATO standard weapons, when we were asking for air defense, and we were told that, we're not able to use them, we're not able to deploy them, we have been not trained, and so on. That was with the tank, that was with the fighter jets. We also got a lot of arguments from NATO member countries that that will be an escalation. But we need to realize that all of this actually is perceived by Putin as weakness. And all of this just encouraged Putin to continue, because the hesitation in support of Ukraine, and including the hesitation with the Ukraine's NATO membership, it just gives the green light to Putin, the message that, there is no unity in support of Ukraine and he can continue. And that was back in 2022, before invasion, when Ukraine was asking for preemptive sanctions. I remember the Munich Security Conference in 2022, just weeks before Russia launched the full-scale invasion. When our president was addressing the Munich Security Conference and asking our partners to show the leadership and to show Putin the unity and to impose the preemptive sanctions for Russia. That was the same argument. That was the argument that we don't want to escalate, and it would be perceived as an escalation. And we also learned the lesson where it all brought us to. So I think this kind of a bravery and courage, which was already learned for many cases during the almost 3.5 years of the full-scale invasion, and over 10 years since Russia first invaded, should already kind of give us this clear argument and clear lesson, and not to avoid the mistakes. Of course, we value the leadership of our European partners to put together the coalition of willing and to kind of try to find the ways of, between today and the future Ukraine's NATO membership, the way to provide the security guarantees. And it will require a lot of money, and it will require a lot of resources. Because we need all realize that Russia's economy today is the economy which is fully on the war wheels. Russia is producing a number of missiles, the number of drones, the number of artillery shells, which exceed many of the European countries altogether. Russia is investing hugely in their army. This is how they are trying to keep their economy together, because the only driver where they can still create the jobs is army. And Putin will not stop it. So of course, the importance is also that the support to Ukraine is not only like, from one occasion to another, the kind of making the announcements of this or that support. It needs to be a multi-year approach, because we are talking about the need for Ukraine to have this security for years ahead. And if you ask me what is needed, is the building of the multi-year approach of helping Ukraine to build the capabilities and to provide the needed training, support, and of course the military equipment. What we see also, as the young rightly mentioned, the big step up within our European partners. We see the Germany and the huge shift in Germany was even they amended the constitution to be able to increase their defense spending. We see also the initiative of Rearm Europe, which, as we understand, Canada also wants to join. Today, it unlocks over 150 billion of financing for the defense sector of EU and Ukraine to increase defense spendings and to increase defense investments. And it's real, it's already the decisions. So I think, talking here in Canada, I think we need to realize that most of the NATO partners are not only making commitments, but also are taking quite bold actions in order to deliver, in order to build this deterrence, because it's felt in the air. Russia's increasing, militarization, it possesses the risk, and there is not so much time for the debates. This is the time to take the actions. And what Ukraine can offer, and we see it rapidly developing now, is the very strong and innovative defense sector. Today, Ukraine's defense sector is kind of like a Silicon Valley, like 30, 40 years ago. You will have, if you were like in Ukraine, you will find like thousands of smart young people who are innovating every day. So it takes probably like less than a month from the prototype of the new drone to be developed and then to test it on the battlefield. So Ukraine that last year produced more artillery systems than all the European countries together. We can do it quicker, we can do it cheaper, and I think what's the Rearm Europe initiative provides is also the platform for collaboration and platform for joint efforts, including with the defense industries, to develop and to build it more rapidly. Because it's not only important to get the funding into defense spending, it's also important to have the defense industry capabilities, which will be ready to deliver.
Excellency, I'm so sorry. If I could, I'm cognizant that we don't have that much time for the rest of our panel. Do you mind if you just wanted to sum up in a sentence or two?
Yes. To sum up, first of all, I would like to also stress that it's important not only to talk on the post-war security, but also understand that the war is going on and the war is brutal. And it's also important to continue to support Ukraine now. And I really want to thank you all and the NATO Association of Canada for having this important discussion today. Thank you, and I will be ready to answer the questions.
Thank you so much, Excellency. I would also like to highlight, before I invite General Hodges to give us some comments, that today, this year, is the 10th anniversary of Operation Unifier, where Canada has been training Ukrainian soldiers. But as the ambassador mentioned, Ukraine has far more to teach us now. And the fact that they will be, no matter what alliance forms, however a security guarantee is met, their ability to actually provide security, to be somebody who is participating in operations globally, is unequivocally going to be extremely important. I'd now like to just briefly mention General Hodges is going to take us through a little bit of a description of the current state of Ukraine's prospects for NATO membership, and specifically the 3 phases necessary for conflict resolution, which is extremely vital to get clear. And there's nothing clearer than a general to tell us. General Hodges, thank you so much.
Now, Robert, if you want to get us back on time, I can just go straight to wait for your questions and go past the statement if you'd like to get back on time.
Well, I think we should be okay. It's just cognizant of time, as long as we've got till 11:40, so we do have time for questions. I just want to make sure that we try to stick to it.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll try to stop at 5 minutes then, and keep it quick and then wait for questions. Now, first of all, Canada has such an important role to play, but Canada needs to get serious. I mean, I hear a lot of talk coming from my Canadian friends, but I don't see a lot of action, to be honest. And because my own country, the United States, is failing miserably to do what needs to be done to help Ukraine, Canada, along with our European allies, has got to step up and do more. And I think a country as wealthy and large as Canada, and also that has such a significant Ukrainian connection, has got to do more. We need more Canadians like Lisa Shemko. I mean, she is a terrier and is relentless. I'm the president of her fan club here in Frankfurt, but she has the kind of spirit, and she's an action figure of a kung fu group. That's what we need to see from the Canadian government, delivering, committing to helping Ukraine actually win. Second message I want to deliver, we talk about what's going on the battlefield. I think Minister Kuleva, former Minister Kuleva, said that there's a reason that Ukraine is not going to compromise on its sovereignty is because it is not facing defeat. Apparently, Ukraine does have some cards, despite what President Trump said. Here we are after more than 11 years of war, and it's important. All of you should remind, when somebody says, oh, it's the 3rd year of the war started in February 22. No, the war started in 2014. This is important because if we put into context what Russia has accomplished and at what cost since 2014, despite having every advantage, the amount of territory that they have captured from Ukraine, it's about 19% of Ukraine. That's after 11 years with every advantage, air, land, and sea, population, industry. That's all that Russia has accomplished. And in fact, at the cost of about, depending on who you ask, about 900,000 killed and wounded Russian soldiers. The part of Ukraine that Russia controlled back in December of 2023 was about 42,000 square miles. Here we are, May 2025, more than 300,000 casualties later, Russia controls about 43,650 square miles. So in other words, the last few years, all these doomer articles about Russia's advancing another village, it's absolute BS, and we need to be positive about what Ukraine is accomplishing and not start looking for the exits or, oh my God, how do we've got to hurry up and stop this because there's no way Russia can be defeated. It's absolutely not true. And what Ukraine has accomplished is without us, the United States or Canada and much of Europe, actually even committing to helping Ukraine win. They've done this without us, a full-fledged effort to help Ukraine win. Just imagine if we had started delivering capability from the very beginning without restrictions and without this nonsensical, we're with you for as long as it takes, what an empty political statement that was. It has to be, we want Ukraine to win, to reestablish its sovereignty back to 1991. We have not used all the economic tools. I mean, if we can shut down Russia's ability to export oil and gas with these shadow fleet vessels going out to the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea, that will choke off their ability to get money from China and India and others who are buying. Now, I have to say, unfortunately, I had zero confidence in the Trump administration's approach. It was doomed from the beginning because they never understood or appreciated the whole reason for the war. They don't know the culture, the history, the geography. When President Trump and Vice President Vance are yelling at President Zelensky in the Oval Office, one of the worst days of my life, saying that you got no cards, they clearly demonstrate they don't understand why people fight. And the fact that they have taken the side of Putin almost 100% of the time also gives away that they're not, the Trump administration actually doesn't give a damn about Ukraine. They're not interested in bringing this thing, conflict to an end unless it involves a big deal of some sort for President Trump. So Canada and Europe are going to have to fill the gap that the United States is leaving behind, unfortunately. The last thing I'd say, President Yuliya Kovaliv, who is an exceptional leader, he talks about 3 phases to end this war in a positive way. Number 1, what we're doing now is the preparation phase. And that's all these conversations happening in Kyiv, in Washington, in Brussels, in Paris, in Riyadh, Istanbul. These are just talks to get to a ceasefire. Ukraine correctly has said there is no possibility of negotiation without a ceasefire because nobody believes that Russia will actually live up to any agreement unless they're forced to. So you have to get to a ceasefire. Of course, that's the last thing the Russians want to do. And to have that ceasefire, you're going to have real forces with rules of engagement that allow them to inflict pain on Russians that violate the ceasefire. So phase 1 is preparation where we are now. Phase 2 will be a ceasefire with some kind of implementation force. And then, of course, phase 3 are actual negotiations where you can talk about sovereignty, future security arrangements, and all of those things. Obviously, it should involve Ukraine becoming a part of our great alliance. Russia has zero authority to dictate what Ukraine does, whether it's NATO or the European Union. And I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Outstanding, General. Thank you so much. What a great tour of some of the requirements that we have. I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Alexander Lenoshka to give us a bit of a tour around what's possible beyond NATO membership. He did write a terrific book, Military Alliances in the 21st Century. The one thing that I would say about our rules-based international order and multilateralism is that there are so many different combinations and different tools that are available to us. So I hope to hear a little bit of an interesting description of what else could be done.
Well, thank you. And first of all, I'd like to express my appreciation to you, Robert, to Bogdana, and to the rest of the NATO Association of Canada for putting together this very important event and asking me to participate in it. Conversations like this one are essential for keeping these issues here top of mind, as well as for better understanding how they evolve, when they evolve. And so I admire you and your team for taking this initiative. So for many citizens across the Euro-Atlantic space, or what we call the Euro-Atlantic space, security guarantees have become a lot like oxygen. You don't think about it until you're short of it. And indeed, for Ukrainians, they have become a matter of life and death that few of us can truly appreciate. Ukrainians have experienced a variety of security arrangements over the course of the last 30 years. The 1994 Budapest Memorandum provided the bare minimum of assurances regarding Ukrainian territorial integrity after Kyiv had ceded control of the Soviet-inherited nuclear weapon stockpile. Those assurances, coupled with de facto, if not official, neutrality, did little, if not nothing, to inoculate Ukraine from Russian land grabs and destabilization in 2014. So it's small wonder, of course, that Article 5, the gold standard of alliance commitments, has held significant and broad appeal in Ukrainian society. And certainly, I'm very much in support of Ukraine's aspirations for NATO membership. Unfortunately, and I say this not as a policymaker or a practitioner or even an activist, I say this as an academic, as you pointed out, a scholar who researches military alliances. Ukraine does find itself in a paradoxical situation, one that has intensified since Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022. The conundrum is as follows. The purpose of NATO is to deter Russia, not to defeat it. However, to join an alliance that deters Russia, Ukraine must first defeat Russia on the battlefield. After all, since the mid-1990s, the alliance has frowned upon aspiring members having any sort of ongoing territorial disputes with their neighbors. Nevertheless, if Russia is defeated strategically on the battlefield, then the requirements for deterrence drop. They drop precipitously, in fact, at least in the short term. And so Ukraine would have less need for NATO in that sort of situation, and NATO would have less need for Ukraine. Worsening matters, of course, is that there has always been at least one NATO ally that has had zero appetite for enlarging the alliance further to include Ukraine. That might have been France and Germany in 2008. That was Hungary and Germany a few years ago. Now it's the United States. You can also perhaps add Slovakia and Hungary under their present leaderships. So since paradoxes defy easy solutions, by definition after all, what can be done? So I think Ukrainian leaders are painfully aware of this situation. And beyond the NATO-Ukraine Council, I think that what they're doing is develop a series of workarounds that may not necessarily lead to full-fledged alliance membership, but nevertheless allow Ukraine to enmesh itself further in the larger Euro-Atlantic community. The first thing to note is that the European security architecture is institutionally much more fragmented than what many of our current or common understandings of it would imply, centered as they are on NATO. On the one hand, yes, NATO is the quintessential military alliance that brings together 30 European countries. It develops a thick mass of institutional mechanisms and frameworks that allow them to coordinate on defense alongside Canada and the United States. Its multilateralism allows Europe, or lends Europe, the sort of cohesion and integrative security of the sort that has been so sorely lacking in that continent for many decades, if not centuries. On the other hand, its primacy notwithstanding, we find within NATO itself a series of countries who pursue bilateral or what we call minilateral groupings with one another so as not to be encumbered by the agonizing necessity of achieving consensus within NATO. After all, NATO is a consensus-based alliance. Every single alliance decision has to have the signing off of all 32 members. Setting aside the various forms of security cooperation undertaken by the European Union, we can identify Britain and France with their Lancaster House treaties, go about functional cooperation in the maritime, nuclear, and defense industrial domains. We can also identify the UK-led Joint Expeditionary Force that brings together expeditionary and maritime elements from the Nordic and Baltic countries. France has recently concluded bilateral agreements with Greece and much more recently with Poland. For its part, Ukraine has been a player in these sorts of developments. It has partnered for many years with Poland and Lithuania to stand up a multinational brigade. Just prior to the launch of the large-scale invasion in 22, the Ukrainian government had signed on to a trilateral initiative with Poland and the United Kingdom. Much of the military aid that Ukraine receives has been through bilateral means. Sometimes, of course, donors have coordinated with respect to the Ramstein format, but again, that's outside of NATO and deliberately so as not to make that aid even more inflammatory as people had worried it would be vis-a-vis Russia. And so if NATO were the only game in town, there would be no such points of entry into the European security architecture. There are thus these bilateral and minilateral opportunities that Ukraine can exploit to develop functional cooperation, particularly for the sake of producing the necessary war materiel that it needs to fight against Russia. Of course, nothing in these alternative arrangements rises to the quality of an Article 5 commitment, and I should add that NATO members will be very disinclined to extend a mutual defense pact with Ukraine because it would be very difficult to deconflict it or to disentangle it with Article 5. Similarly, I'm skeptical of proposals for NATO troops to be anywhere near the line of contact in some sort of post-war scenario as peacekeepers, precisely because that would invite very difficult legal and political questions about the rules of engagement and so forth. Nevertheless, as much as it is clear that being within NATO is better than being without NATO, and this is again a lesson that Ukrainians have to endure every day, membership is neither necessary nor sufficient for security. What is necessary is having a strong defense industrial base, something that most of us, especially here in Canada, have neglected in the North Atlantic. The bilateral agreements that Ukraine had signed last year have this end in mind. They may not necessarily be headline grabbing as an alliance membership. They may not have the same sort of legal or reputational implications of a written down treaty, but they're certainly much more valuable and robust than the infamous Budapest Memorandum. So when you see a company like Rheinmetall, a very significant German defense contractor, announce its intention to go about joint production in Ukraine, furnishing that country with large supplies of ammunition, especially for those with the intention of boosting Ukrainian air defenses, that does have a very tangible and positive effect. So more of those sorts of agreements are obviously going to be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That dovetails very nicely into what Balkan's going to take a look at and dig into. And what General Hodges was mentioning is, what can Canada do? What is it that we should be doing, that we must give our attention to? Because I tell you, there's so much that's going on at the moment that our attention can easily get distracted. And Balkan's going to talk a little bit about how Canada can contribute to Ukraine's long-term peace and reconstruction, and leading on asset confiscation, financial deterrence, and defense investment. Obviously, that's kind of what we want to talk into and lead into for the rest of this conference. How can we make sure that the investment is there, but for the investment to be there, we need the security. So, Balkan, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you very much for the invitation and for the audience to show up in this gray Saturday morning. We really, really appreciate that. Let me maybe make 3 points so that we can, when we go to, and I can expand them when we go to Q&A. Number one, let me start with the asset confiscation debate. When we talk about security guarantees, we also need to talk about the financial components of this, not only for the ongoing defense of Ukraine, but for the reconstruction as well. And Ambassador rightly so highlighted the costs that will be required to rebuild Ukraine. But even before we get there, we need to be able to have enough support for Ukraine to be able to continue its defense against Russia's war. And that really starts with providing resources. Let me put it this way. Recently, I think it was in Washington Post yesterday, an article talks about Russia's shadow fleet and its export of oil and gas. And there was a very striking line in that article. European Union member states paid more money to Russia for hydrocarbon purchases, oil and gas, in the last 3 years than the total amount of aid that they gave to Ukraine. Right? Let me repeat it again. EU member states paid more for Russian oil and gas than the amount they gave to Ukraine. Oil exports are 1/3 of Russian states' revenues. Russian oil continue to be purchased in Europe. Russian LNG is continuing to be purchased in Europe. Yes, China and India are the biggest buyers of Russian oil, but so others, right? So number one, the funding that Russia can get to continue its war is not going anywhere, which means Europe, Canada, and the United States need to match and continue to support Ukraine so that they can continue to produce and continue to fight in the front lines. One way to do it is to confiscate the already frozen Russian central bank assets. The numbers vary. It's about $300 billion, about I think slightly over 200 billion of it is in Euroclear, and these are Russian central bank assets that are held in various currencies, including the Canadian dollar. About $22 billion worth, 22 billion Canadian dollars worth of Russian central bank assets are held in Canadian dollars in Euroclear, which means, I don't want to get into details, I'll be happy to do so. My friend and colleague Erin Gash-Burnett and Yuliya Ziskina and others wrote about the asset seizures quite a bit and the technical details. But the bottom line is, the Canadian government can take the lead and confiscate 22 billion Canadian dollars worth of Russian assets and transfer it to Ukraine. Europeans can do the same. There is, unfortunately, no appetite for this. The Belgian Prime Minister stated that it will be an act of war if that happens. Euroclear is very concerned about its stability. European Central Bank have been concerned about Euro's stability, etc., which I think are all exaggerated. And again, several people wrote about this and explained why this is not going to be the disaster that these people are saying. But the bottom line is this, though. If you are sitting in Kremlin and you're looking at Canadian support, European support, and you ask yourself, they are not even bring themselves to seize the money that is sitting in their bank accounts. Will they send their troops, their men and women, in harm's way? No. If Europe and if Canada cannot even dare to seize the Russian assets that has already been seized, would Vladimir Putin or any of the Russian regime or the elite believe any assurance force that would be part of any post-war settlement? I doubt very much. I don't want to get into the sort of the details of why I completely agree with Alexander's skepticism about the assurance force, whether it's sustainable, whether we're going to go there, et cetera, et cetera. But this very simple fact that an action that we can take, that has been in our power in the last 3 years, has not happened, does not necessarily make me very optimistic about our willingness to do what is necessary. And I think, and I'm going to sort of end here, what Canada can do is, number one, of course, is take the lead in seizing Russian assets. Our exposure to Russian economy is minimal. We are extremely well positioned in G7 to take the leadership, to step up. And we had a very good start. It was Christopher Freeland who suggested to actually froze those assets and use as collateral for loans, etc. But then we stopped and we took a step back. I think it is time for us to step up and lead within G7, provide an opportunity for our partners and allies to see that the roof will not collapse, the world would not end if we seize Russian assets and start providing those to Ukraine. And then we can start talking about how Canada needs to invest in its defense capabilities, what we can do in terms of joint production in Ukraine, etc. And my last word would be, a lot of this is not technical or legal problems. This is about the political will. And the political will is about making sure that our politicians and our publics understand that if we don't want to pay pennies today, we will pay hundreds of dollars in the future. We're not only going to spend more money, but we will also spill blood in order to defend ourselves and in order to defend our allies. And politicians, like everyone else, respond to incentives. They need to hear from the Canadians again and again and again that supporting Ukraine is not charity, but it is self-interest. That we need to step up if we don't want to be in a position that is much, much worse for everyone. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much to our panelists. We now have about 35 minutes for questions. I will ask our interns, we will have two coming around. We've got one microphone, I think, there, and then we'll donate one of oh, there's one there, perfectly. So there should be two. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask a first question that should be fairly in-depth, I'd think, to start us off. And that is to take a look at the aspects of the future. I know prognostication is nobody's joy to do, but you do have to hope for the best but plan for the worst. I do want to kind of dig into what are the possible futures we might see. What is the best and worst case scenario? I'd love to just try to imagine what those would look like so we can get some good bookends on what the future might look like and thereby help to kind of guide our conversation and the importance of Canada and so many other allies stepping up. Why is it so important? So I'm not sure if Ambassador, you'd like to start off, or anybody else. I'd be happy to make this more of a conversation than a single block by block panel discussion. Or General Hodges, specifically taking a look at that third aspect of the...
Okay, this war ends when Vladimir Putin realizes he cannot win. I mean, full stop. Ukraine is going to keep killing Russian soldiers as long as the Russians keep sending them in. The Kremlin does not care how many casualties they have, and as long as their economy is still propped up, Putin is going to keep doing what he's doing. So that means, how do we make him realize that he cannot win? And I think that's when Canada and Europe, and again, I'm assuming that the United States under the Trump administration is never going to do anything substantial to help in this situation. So Canada and Europe together wrecking Russia's oil and gas industry by stopping, seizing these shadow fleet vessels, preventing them from being able to export oil and gas, enabling Ukraine with long-range weapons technology that would allow Ukraine to continue going after Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, and then oil-producing nations working together to manipulate the market so that the price goes down enough that it also contributes to Russia's economic ruin. That's when Putin will realize, okay, they're serious, I'm never going to win, and that's the only way I think we get him to any kind of negotiation. They have to feel the economic pain, including what one of my fellow panel members said, seizing all of Russia's frozen assets and using that to help pay for aid to Ukraine. But finally, they need to hear the Prime Minister Carney, plus every leader in Europe say, it is our strategic objective that Ukraine wins. Not we're going to support you or we want to help Ukraine get to a better negotiating position. It is our strategic objective that Ukraine wins this war, and then we do stuff to back that up.
Well, without getting into best or worst case scenarios, I tend to be a little more pessimistic than the general on this issue of what it would take for Putin to end the war. I don't think Putin is going to end the war, not as long as he's alive. And I think that for him, there's a particular political project afoot. It's one that is shared by members of the elite who directly surround him. And in that particular perspective, they're fighting a colonial war, and they have a particular ownership of Ukrainian society. They can't imagine losing because it's just simply unthinkable. And for them, they don't actually have to use so much force to cause problems for NATO in Ukraine. For them, they could just go about some drone strikes here and there, and that'll be enough to scare Western investors from their perspective. I'm not saying that the level of the intensity will remain constant. It won't. But they'll certainly do enough to ensure that there's some sort of conflict that is armed and certainly ever present in a way that will more or less keep the war ongoing. I mentioned his death because what happens after he dies, no one knows. There's no clear succession plan. I'm not saying it's going to be like the Troubles in the 17th century, but people have talked about the Troubles, the Smuta, as being perhaps the feature of Russian politics after he's gone, because it'll be every man, woman, and child for themselves in that particular situation in Russia. Maybe there'll be a new leader who has to take stock of Russia's political positioning vis-a-vis the West and will push forward for a more credible reset. And that could mean some sort of war-terminating outcome, but so long as Putin is alive, I'm afraid that the war is going to go on in some form.
I do agree with both Alexander and the general, actually, in the one sense that as long as Putin is alive, I'm not sure he will give up his dream of conquering Ukraine. However, I agree with the general in the sense that the path to changing the calculus of the Russian elite and the Russian public at large is to convince them and show them that imperialism is costly. It is not going to bring the benefits to them that they are hoping. And this, of course, goes through enabling Ukraine to kill as many Russian soldiers as possible, destroy as much of Russian equipment as possible, and the West putting as much pressure as possible to destroy the Russian economy and make the ordinary Russians and the Russian elite feel the pain much more, to the extent that they and the elite themselves recognize that, well, this is not worth it. You have to remember that every month, 30,000 of Russians sign up to go to Ukraine to kill, to rape, to pillage, to plunder, right? Every month. These are not conscripts that are taken from the streets and sent. These people sign up, vast majority of them sign up to go and fight. Until and unless the broader Russian society and the Russian elite recognize that the cost of their imperial ambitions are not worth it, they will continue to war. It will come after Putin is out. We might help him to go. He's not, immortal. At least one hopes. And then we'll see. The best case scenario, in that sense, we need to be also realistic with ourselves. Russia is not an acute threat that will disappear after the war is over in Ukraine. Russia is a chronic threat to European peace and stability, and it will remain a chronic threat until and unless that particular mindset changes.
Ambassador, any comment on that at all?
Yes, thank you for your comments. I will give you a bit of the comment from Ukraine. First, we'll continue to fight because you know that whatever support will be big and decisive, all will rely on our own needs because we are fighting for our country, and you know that the kickoff Putin is just to erase Ukraine as a nation, and we see exactly what he's doing in the occupied territories, and every Ukrainian understands, what is the fight for. But also, I think you're right in the previous colleagues from the panel were right that for Putin it's kind of this imperial ambitions to rebel to the big kind of Russian empire. But there are two things I want to specifically mention. First, we need to also realize that between our partners, there need to be the clear vision of whether they want to help us so that Russia will be defeated, or they will continue to stand us for as long as it takes. And it's all the significant difference between the approaches. Because we will stand with you as long as it takes. This will end up with this teaspoon strategy on giving us the minimum we need to continue to hold the lines. Vice versa was this strategy to help us to defeat Russia is that there are two main fronts. One is the battlefield, where, of course, the ability to strike long range, with the use of long-range weapons, it's not only like military needed, but it also needed to, for many Russian population, to kind of see the consequences of the war, because it is essential. The second thing is the economic front, and you already mentioned about this, the need for the decisive actions in terms of the sanctions, in terms of the oil shadow fleet, in terms of seizing the Russian assets, because what happens now in Russia is that they are still available to provide people the social support, salaries, jobs. However, it's not easy. The last few months we saw this significant decrease with the oil prices. Russian economy is targeted by sanctions. The inflation rate slowing down with many of the industries, but it's still not enough. Imagine if those actions would have been done like 2 or 3 years ago. Today's Russian economy would be in a different shape. And that's also another lesson of kind of being reluctant to bold actions, which really also means that Russia was able to invest $10 billion into building the shadow oil fleet. And didn't we all knew it a year ago? We do. So where are those actions? I think, the overall messaging and the decision making need to be kind of speed up. But I would do also specifically for Canada another dimension. And this dimension is Arctic, where Russia is increasing their presence. And this presence is also backed with the other countries who have the particular interest in the Arctic region. So as today Russian troops and Russian military industry base is working to produce the weapons and to supply them on the front lines for Ukraine, you all are, we need the time to prepare for the building the resilience in Arctic. So what also Ukrainians are fighting today is just to give you time to prepare, to invest in Arctic security, because that is another place of the geopolitical and security tensions. So for Canada, helping Ukraine now to deter Russia is also winning the time to protect yourself in Arctic.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ambassador. We do have 2 of our interns. We've got a question here. We'll try to take a few at a time and see if we can address them to the panel. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. General Hodges, thank you for being on there. I watch everything you do. As a Canadian, it's kind of embarrassing that we've neglected our military for so long that we really can't be taken seriously in that respect. But I think something Canada still has going for it is the soft power piece of it and the look that we have from around the world. And Dr. Devlen, you mentioned the seizure of Russian confiscated assets, as I think a lot of, maybe not everyone gets. That is sort of like foreclosing on your house when it comes to the Russians. Literally, they are borrowing against it. There are defense contractors that are literally being forced to produce at a loss and are covered by loans that are secured against those things. You take that away and you basically wipe out the Russian economy overnight. Now, we're still in a country where the levers we can pull, we're not pulling. And we have the G7 presidency and the G7 summit coming up in Alberta very shortly. And what is it that we can do? We don't have any government people here, decision makers in this room, so clearly it's not being taken very seriously. What can we do as Canadians? What can we do as influencers to get our government in action to actually do something and exercise some leadership and get out from behind and start actually doing something? What is it that we can do to pressure our leaders and politicians to actually show up? And in particular on this issue, and Dr. Devlen, you mentioned it, but how do we get them to actually pull the levers they can pull?
Thank you so much. If we can just take 2 more questions. Go ahead. Yep.
Hi. I'm thinking about the concept of in getting a ceasefire, which would be great to stop the killing, but my concern is that really amounts to an opportunity for Putin to secure his current gains and give him time to build up more resources to continue in the future. Because I can't see any other pressure that can be put on him that would get him to actually give up his current gains. So am I looking at this the wrong way, or am I on the right track?
And one more, if we've got.
So for the last several years, we've seen that European countries still buying Russian oil, China is supporting Russia, and the question is, after the end of the war, would NATO still be interested in Ukraine? And if we see that international deals no longer work, what Ukraine can do to protect itself from a new war with Russia?
All right, so I will open this to the panel, although the first was directed to you, General. What can we do to help pressure Russia, and especially for the financial aspect that Devlen already mentioned? And then we'll move on to whether a ceasefire is just a rest for Mr. Putin and the Russians, and of course, would NATO still be interested in Ukraine after the war? General, did you go ahead?
Yeah, the first question, of course, this is about political will, and this is where the Prime Minister, supported by Canada's Parliament and other leaders, have got to explain to Canadians, talk to them as if they were adults, and say, look, this is what's at stake. This is why it's in the interest of Canadians to help Ukraine defeat Russia. Not just because you have a lot of Canadian Ukrainians living in Canada, but because it is about this international rules-based order. It's about sovereignty. It's about respect for freedom of navigation. All things that are important to Canada and Canada's industry. And by the way, the Chinese are absolutely watching to see, does the West really have the political will to defend sovereignty and freedom of navigation and international law? Because if they see that we don't have it against Russia, where it would be much easier to do that than it will be out in the Indo-Pacific region, that has real strategic implications for Canada. And so I think this is where the Prime Minister's got to say, this is the priority, and we're going to do something about it. And I must say that Canada's media needs to get super engaged in this and keep people focused on it. Let me address the last part, and then I'll do whatever you want, Robert. The future of Ukraine. First of all, whether or not the United States does, and I pray to God that we will, but even if we fail, for Europe, it's going to be essential that Ukraine is able to be a part of Europe, not just to keep the Russians away, but there will be millions more Ukrainian refugees going into Romania and Germany and Poland if Ukraine is not successful. There will be no reconstruction. I spoke to a very senior investment person at Munich Security Conference, and he said there's no way they're going to put money into Ukraine for reconstruction if it looks like the war is just going to continue. So this is bad for not only Ukraine, it's bad for Europe because of the continued disruption of food, of energy, of minerals, as well as the aforementioned refugee challenge. So this is in the strategic interest of all of us to help Ukraine be able to defend itself until it is in NATO. And that means investing in Ukraine's defense industry so that they can produce what's needed.
Maybe on the what can we do to convince our leaders? There are 2 things. One, we need to continue to put pressure, reach out and talk to them. Both Alexander and I were and continue to be part of an initiative right before the election that sent a memo and an open letter memo to 3 political parties and an open letter that is signed by former foreign ministers, former prime ministers, including Stephen Harper and Boris Johnson and former Latvian prime minister and others, and a bunch of other people across the transatlantic space that calls for the parties, the leaders, before the election to commit to seize those confiscated assets. The Conservative Party put out a statement saying that they will, if they were to form the government. The Liberal Party repeated its statements about working with allies to ensure that those funds don't go back, etc., but did not commit, unfortunately, to seizing the assets. We continue to push before the G7 and using all the resources that we have to reach to the politicians and present this as what it is. This is not a Ukrainian-Canadian issue. This is not and should not be and cannot be a topic that just concerns Ukrainian Canadians. This is important for all Canadians. This is about our security, about our prosperity, and our place in the world. And I think the best thing you can do is to use your connections, to use your networks, to use your time and influence to repeatedly talk to the people in government, in the bureaucracy, in PMO, with the government and the ministers, to remind them that this is something we can do. That words are important, yes, but action speaks louder than the words, and that we could take action that could actually meaningfully support Ukraine, rather than repeating the old cliches of "we will always stand with Ukraine."
Yeah, very much echoing Her Excellency's remarks about the requirement to be bold and how we failed every single time. Ambassador, do you have any other comments, or we could?
Yes, actually, especially on the seizing of Russian assets. Look, Canada already made a lot of steps among G7 and the allies to be the leader. Canada was the first one to introduce the legislation that allows to seize Russian sovereign assets. Not the sovereign, but the assets which are under the sanctions. And you started the first two cases, which definitely would just needed to be, pushed through all the system and putting them, reaching to the court for to decide. But that was already the bold move, which I personally had a lot of questions from my colleagues in G7 countries and the ambassadors here to kind of understand the approach and the interest, and many countries are still watching on whether and how it will be implemented. So you are now kind of on a good sense showing the example, but also it needs to be really implemented. The other thing is about the example of Canadian leadership, and I'm really very grateful for the former Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, because her wisdom, passion, and also the energy and effort not to introduce the mechanism which we call the ERA, extended revenues from Russian frozen assets, which was actually the big deliverable of last year G7 summit, where the countries agreed on 50 billion of support package to Ukraine, which is not your taxpayers' money, but it's the money which is backed by the revenues from Russian sovereign assets, which allow to kind of support Ukraine with this package and to help the country move on in terms of the budget deficit financing and some part for the for support of our military needs. And that was a big milestone. And that is Canada who was behind this, inventing this decision and advocating among G7. And a lot of credits for Chrystia Freeland for making it happen. So is the example of whether Canada can do it? Yes. It requires leadership. It requires a lot of effort, because from any good idea, you need to build this consensus and political will among the partners. And I think, the voice of each of you matters, because we are all living in democratic countries where, political leaders, the decision makers are also on the what the public opinion is. So each of you is kind of my colleague ambassador for this ideas to happen, and we are on the eve of G7 meeting. Yes, this meeting will be quite a challenging But there should be some deliverables, not only like standing with Ukraine, well, no matter how long it takes, but it is also about kind of like Canada's leadership, especially this year as the chair of G7 countries.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. We have 10 minutes left. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
To answer the question on the ceasefire, I would just say that no, you're not wrong. You're not off base by any means. In fact, that has been a concern for the last 3 years, that any sort of ceasefire would disproportionately benefit Russia. Of course, Ukraine would benefit from a ceasefire too, for perhaps the same reasons. It could reconstitute its forces, it could resolve its manpower difficulties, it can, in fact, use time to rebuild. I'm sure society would also appreciate a reprieve from airstrikes as well. If you believe, however, that Russia would reconstitute faster, then, of course, it begs the question, why have one in the first place, to be sure. On the point about NATO's future interest in Ukraine, provided that the war is over, I think there is a critical mass of countries within NATO that would still be very much interested in Ukraine. Those would be your usual suspects, the Baltic countries, as well as the Nordic countries, in addition to Poland and certainly the Czech Republic under its current presidency. You might have a smattering of other allies, for whatever reason, that might be like-minded enough on the issue of Russia than perhaps political opponents at home. So I'm not too concerned about that. And there are going to be those investment opportunities, and there will be a lot of attraction there too in some sort of post-war situation where peace is a viable prospect, and that you can have those sorts of investments and be certain that they're not going to be attacked anytime soon. So I think there is that sort of interest. It might not be the entire alliance. You have to bear in mind it's 32 members. It's amazing that they can agree on anything. So it does move slowly, to be sure, but that's by dint of its very constitution. The North Atlantic Treaty stresses the sovereignty of each member. And so none of its slowness is surprising. None of the disagreements that we see are surprising. It's actually miraculous that they're able to do as much as they have in some respects.
All right, 3 more questions. If you can try to keep your question to the point, and a question, not a statement. We'll take 3 and try to get rapid fire. Please go ahead. Robert, please go ahead.
Hi, Robert. My question is for General Hodges. I'm not very convinced that the European countries and Canada will come to the table with the steps necessary to seize Russian assets. Everyone's afraid of a nuclear strike, and Putin has been very cunning and clever in how he's maintained that fear. I do think the option is a success on the battlefield, and I think one of the obvious ones is to destroy that bridge into Crimea. So could I ask you as a general, if you were in a position to coordinate the activities of the Ukrainian armed forces and with additional supplies from Western countries, I think they feel more secure giving more arms, munitions, because they can do it quietly. And then how would you bring about a circumstance for a significant military breakthrough for Ukraine?
Thank you so much. Just take 2 more. Sorry we can't take more, but we'll try to have questions afterwards informally.
My question is to the panel. We today have focused on the front line quite a bit, but in my view, the digital war, the war for the minds of the population of Ukraine is equally important. And my question is what kind of measures are taken in Ukraine to neutralize the disinformation war, to neutralize the influence of planted assets in the country by the Russian regime, to be able to create a foundation that after post-war Ukraine can build and rebuild itself in a successful way without the effects on the minds of the population by the Russian disinformation war.
And just 1 more over here, Anastasia.
Thank you. My question is, why do you think that the idea of withholding aid or restricting aid to Ukraine has become so prevalent with Western leaders as a strategy to avoid escalation? And why do you think that Western and NATO leaders have such a hard time realizing that this exact approach is often what does lead to further escalation from Putin and from Russia, being seen as just weakness from the West?
Three outstanding questions. A direct question to you, General. What would you do if you were in charge of the Ukrainian forces?
Well, first of all, I have to address the nuclear question. Russia has somehow convinced us that they're actually going to use the nuclear weapon, when in fact they're never going to use the nuclear weapon. There's no chance they're going to use the nuclear weapon. Of course they have thousands of nuclear warheads. Of course they don't care how many innocent people they kill, including their own. There's zero benefit for Russia to use a tactical nuclear weapon anywhere in Ukraine or anywhere else. It would get all the fence sitters off the fence in supporting Ukraine. It would make it difficult for China and India and others to continue to do any sort of business with Russia. So, and there's no benefit on the battlefield. So I think that, unfortunately, the Biden administration, which did so much to help Ukraine, was too easily manipulated by every time a Trump Medvedev comes out and talks about using a nuclear weapon against London or Berlin or Warsaw, or when Putin says, oh, we may have to do a nuclear exercise, or I hope that there's no need to use a nuclear weapon. These are all nonsense statements to keep reminding us that they have nuclear weapons, and we fall for it every time. So this is where our leaders should be saying, hey, don't forget, Vladimir, we have nukes also, and every time you threaten us, I'm going to send another boatload of ammunition to Ukraine, so knock it off. We should stand up to that. But to the point, I believe that Crimea is the decisive terrain of this war. That's really what Putin wants, is in terms of geographical thing, in addition to destroying Ukraine as a state. Obviously, the control of the Crimean Peninsula is the same reason that Catherine the Great took it back in the 18th century. And so for Ukraine to get it back, they have to do three things. Number one, they have to make it untenable for Russian forces by using long-range precision strike. They've already done this and set up a Stoffel, so that the Black Sea Fleet, which has a really cool name, but is not really a very good navy. I mean, they're not even in the picture anymore because of what Ukraine has done to them. But also make it impossible for Russian air forces and logistics and other things to operate out of Crimea. Make it untenable. And you really need long-range precision weapons to be able to do that. The second thing, of course, is to isolate the Crimean Peninsula from the rest of Russian forces. And of course, the only ways to get there are either by some sort of ferry or that stinky bridge. And I cannot wait for the day that that thing goes down. And it will go down. I think that you're going to be looking on talking about the I think General Bogdanov probably has a clever plan for how he's going to do it. But it's not going to be a couple of horses that drop that bridge. I mean, it's an enormous bridge. And I think they will have figured out ways that we're not even thinking of to do it in such a way that it goes down in a catastrophic way, but also in conjunction with other things that are happening. And then the third part, obviously, is the liberation of Crimea. And I don't envision some sort of amphibious operation. That would be a very difficult goal, but something more involving Ukraine's excellent special forces, sabotage, drone, all the different tools that they have in order to regain the Crimean Peninsula. It certainly is going to be very difficult, a hell of a challenge, but I've been impressed with the Ukrainian general staff. I mean, they have been under-resourced and at disadvantage from the beginning, but yet they keep doing things that show innovation, risk-taking, and I think that they will have figured out a way to do it when the time is right. And so I am confident in that, but I don't want to make it sound easier than it is. Otherwise, they would have obviously already done it.
Thanks so much, General. If I could ask all three of the rest of our panelists just to We only have a few minutes. If you could each try to take a minute and take a stab at how do we neutralize disinformation, and as far as the first question is concerned as well, the nuclear strike fear, and why do you think that restricting arms to Ukraine has been such a common desire? So whoever would like to start.
On the very last point about the restriction of arms, it's actually more depressing. The truth is more depressing than the common argument made of us being scared about nuclear weapons. The fact of the matter is we don't have weapons to give.
Yeah, on both the nuclear escalation and Alex's point of we don't have anything to give, that was, I think, one of the, I would add two things to it. Yes, we being giving from the stocks and we're not replenishing it because it's into, and since then. And we're not building enough because our governments don't want to put the resources in order to enable the industry to be able to ramp up the production, et cetera, et cetera. So we're still talking about a few hundred long-range strikes, weapons being produced in Europe and so on and so forth per year. So we're not doing it because we don't have it. And of course, armies tend to, and armed forces in general, would like to also keep certain capabilities so that they can continue to train and be ready for it. So they get more and more reluctant to give. But the other one initially, and I would unfortunately say that this should have changed by now, but especially initially, if you remember, with the exception of a few countries, Poland and the Baltics, most of Europe and the US waited about a week to figure out how the war would go. And there was a reluctance continuously to see whether Ukraine will be able to survive, and a reluctance then to give weapon systems that might actually fall in the hands of Russians. That should have been dispelled in the past 3 years, but I think there is a limit to it. I'll let Yuliya to talk about this information.
Ambassador, last minute.
Thank you. In terms of the reluctancy and having not having any of the systems, just two small examples. First, like there was a political will for Canada to help Ukraine with air defense, and we bought the NASA system for us. There was the political will from Baltic and Nordic countries to do much bigger for Ukraine, so they launched the Danish model, where they used their funding to support Ukrainian defense industry for the need for the frontline. So there is always the way in how to help, including with the long-range weapons. There are those countries like who are willing to provide, or like Germany, who are willing to fund some of the development of this kind of the weapons in Ukraine. So Canada has a lot to offer, including financially to support the initiative. So there is always a way on how these things can be figured out together. On disinformation, I think the question is broader, because Russia is not only working with their disinformation campaigns in Ukraine. All the NATO member countries and beyond, the allies of Ukraine are those targets. And you see a lot of this happening during the election campaigns and beyond, and Russia is putting significant efforts and money into the key goal, to break the unity between the partners, to disunite, and to decrease support of Ukraine. So it's not only the problem with Ukraine that we are dealing with this disinformation, but it's also the problem for Canada. It's always the problem. It's also the problem for Germany, for France, for Britain, for Eastern European flank. And I think we need to be all together very concerned about it, call it out, educate people, and talk a lot to people. Because in this world of the digital platforms, we're supporting a lot the Russian disinformation. There is no single easy answer on how to deal with it, but this is much bigger kind of a battlefield, because this is the battlefield for the will of people. And in democracy, it also had the impact on the political leadership and decision making. So there should be a lot more efforts for us to first identify and take the country measures. But it's all our kind of a big joint effort together. Thank you.
General Hodges, the last 30 seconds. Well done. Well, thank you to our whole panel. A real pleasure. I do have some gifts for the two who are in person, and for those who are on Zoom, General Ambassador, thank you so much. We'll have to have you for gifts at another time. But thank you so much for that great discussion. And both Balkan and Alexander will be here, so if you want to corner them and ask any further questions, they will be at your disposal. Thank you so much, everyone.